All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about a technology that's pretty much everywhere, neural networks. But to really get what they are, we have to go back to the original source code, the machine that inspired it all, the human brain. We're going to see what we can learn from the ultimate blueprint.
So, let's kick things off with a real head scratcher. A bat's brain is tiny, about the size of a plum. Yet it uses echolocation to navigate and hunt with a level of precision that our most advanced billion-dollar sonar systems can only dream of. It's an absolute marvel of efficiency. And this really gets to the heart of our question. How does nature compute so incredibly well, and what ideas can we borrow from its design?
Okay, so before we even try to build an artificial brain, let's just take a moment to appreciate the incredible feats of the original. This is our starting point, our blueprint.
Now, look at this comparison. It's kind of wild. You can spot a friend in a crowded room in literally the blink of an eye. A really powerful computer, it struggles with that same task. So why is that? It's not about raw speed. The brain is just doing something fundamentally different. It's processing everything at once, in parallel, instead of just plodding along one step at a time.
And it's not just about speed, it's about efficiency. The brain performs all its magic on a microscopic amount of energy. I mean, a tiny, tiny fraction of what our biggest supercomputers burn through to do far less. If we could build machines that efficient, it would be a complete game changer.
So, how does the brain get so darn good at all this? Well, the secret sauce is something called plasticity. You see, your brain isn't a fixed piece of hardware. Nope, it's constantly changing, physically rewiring itself based on experience. This incredible ability to adapt to its environment is the biological key to learning.
And that brings us right to the core idea of an artificial neural network. We're trying to copy that biological blueprint. It's a machine built from tons of simple units, all working in parallel. But the key, the real magic, is how it learns, by strengthening or weakening the connections between those units. It stores knowledge in those synaptic weights, just like our brains do. So, if the network is the whole system, what about the individual parts? Let's zoom in and see how we can translate a biological neuron into a simple functional diagram that we can actually build. It really boils down to 4 simple steps. First, the neuron gets inputs. Easy enough. Second, each of those inputs gets multiplied by a weight. You can think of this like a volume knob. A higher weight just means that signal is more important. Third, the neuron adds up all of these weighted signals. And finally, that grand total is passed through what's called an activation function. So what's that activation function for? Well, it's basically the neuron's gatekeeper. It looks at the combined signal and decides if it's strong enough to get passed along. It asks a simple question. Is this important enough to fire? And that simple yes or no decision, when you layer thousands of them together, is what allows the entire network to model incredibly complex problems.
A single artificial neuron is simple, right? But the real power, just like in the brain, emerges when you connect thousands or even millions of them into a massive interconnected system.
The most basic arrangement you can have is a single layer network. It's pretty straightforward. You have a layer of inputs that feeds signals forward directly to a layer of output neurons. There's nothing in between. It's simple, direct, and good for basic problems. But to tackle the really complex stuff, the kind of problems our brains solve all the time, we need more depth. So we add 1 or more hidden layers of neurons sandwiched between the input and the output. They're called hidden because they're not directly connected to the outside world. So what are these hidden layers actually doing? This is where the heavy lifting happens. They allow the network to find deeper, more complex patterns in the data, what the experts call extracting higher-order statistics. Think of it like this. The first layer might just learn to see simple lines and edges. The next layer combines those into basic shapes, and a deeper layer can combine those shapes to recognize something as complex as a face. It's a hierarchy of understanding, built layer by layer. So we have the structure, but the critical question is still on the table. How does it actually learn? How do we get the teacher into the machine? The most common method is called supervised learning, and honestly, it works just like studying with flashcards. You show the network an input, let's say a picture of a cat, and you also give it the correct answer, the label cat. This labeled data is provided by a so-called teacher. The learning process is basically a cycle of trial and error. First, the network makes a guess. Second, that guess gets compared to the right answer. Third, we measure the size of the error. How wrong was it? And fourth, and this is the absolute key, the network slightly adjusts all of its little synaptic weights to make a better guess next time. It repeats this cycle thousands, sometimes millions of times.
You know, this is a fundamental shift from how we usually think about computers. Knowledge isn't stored in one specific spot, like a file in a folder. Instead, it's distributed across the entire pattern of connections. The knowledge is the network. Learning, then, is simply the process of fine-tuning all of those connections. We've seen how they're built and how they learn. So let's pull back and look at the real-world benefits. What are the big advantages of this brain-inspired approach? There are 4 huge benefits here. Nonlinearity lets them handle messy, real-world data. Adaptivity means they can keep learning as the world changes. Fault tolerance means they don't just crash if one part breaks down. But the most powerful benefit of all, the real superstar, is that last one, generalization. Generalization is the holy grail. It's the ability to perform well on new, unseen data. This is what separates a machine that has truly learned from one that has just memorized a bunch of examples. What this really means is that a well-trained network hasn't just memorized what a cat looks like from all the training photos. No way. It has learned the idea of a cat, the underlying patterns and rules that define catness. And that's why it can correctly identify a cat in a photo it has never, ever seen before. So we end where we began, with the brain as our blueprint. We've copied its structure and its amazing ability to learn, creating this powerful new form of computing. But this leaves us with a pretty profound question. As our artificial networks get better and better at mimicking the brain, where does this blueprint truly lead us next?